Hey y'all, it's Sparkle. Today's my birthday, and I want you guys to check out this all white business casual fit. I chose all white because it represents purity. Again, I want to thank you guys for tuning in to the first official episode of Sparkle Speaks. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Sparkle Speaks. I'm Sparkle, and today is my birthday, and I'm so excited to launch this podcast with you where faith, inspiration, and real life conversation collide through heartfelt storytelling. I want you to like, comment, and subscribe, share with a friend, and invite them in. I was actually in conversation with my mom the other day, and we were talking about how I grew up, and I grew up a church girl. My mom had me in church. I feel like it was from Sunday to Sunday. And she told me that when I was 3 years old, I ran up to the front of the church and I told the bishop at the time that I wanted to be baptized. And he then said, well, whose daughter is this? And my mom said that it was me. She said that it was her. So she said that I got baptized at 3 years old. And from 3 years old up until I moved out my mom's house, she had us in church. My mom, she was a strict parent. She didn't really let us go too many places, but she made sure we went to church. And one thing she always would do is tell us to fast and pray, fast and pray. I never really fasted when I was a kid, but I always remembered that was something that my mom told me to do. Let's fast forward. As I grew up and got older, I kind of drifted away from church. I didn't go as much. I went, every Sunday, sometimes every other Sunday. But I started doing my own thing. I would party, I would do a little drinking, I would, vacation, which is not a bad thing. But my main focus wasn't God at the time, but I always knew where to go. If I needed trouble, if I was in trouble or if something was going on in my life, I knew who to turn to. Fast forward a little more. Yesterday I was 33. And I decided to name this podcast, I'm Not Who I Was a Year Ago, simply because, I'm going to go back to about 2023. Around that time, I was going through a lot of things. I suffer from depression, anxiety, different things. No one really knew about it because I was able to I was able to put that in the back of me. I was still able to party. I was still able to do whatever I wanted to do. But once I got home and alone, that's when I would feel actually what I was going through. At the end of 2023, I text my group chat and I'm like, you know what? I'm tired of this. Come January, I'm done. I'm done drinking. I'm done partying. I'm ready for a change. And I knew what God could actually do for me because in the beginning of 2023, I went to church and my bishop, he actually called me out in a service and he told me that God wanted to do so much for me. He was going to blow my mind to be to church the next 7 Sundays. And if I came to church the next 7 Sundays, God was going to blow my mind. And that day, I decided to fast from liquor. I fast from liquor. I went about 46, 47 days. And literally within that time frame, God blew my mind. And it was just so amazing. But when it came time for my birthday came and I felt like I needed to celebrate. So, I get my drink and I get my bottles, I'm partying, and I went back to who I was before I stopped. And then that's when all of the depression began to come back, the anxiety, everything that I was going through before I stopped and I was obedient to God. So at the end of 2023, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to change for good because I know what God can do for me and what he wants for me. And I can't pick and choose when I want to serve him, when I want to stop, and when I want to do right, and when I want to go back and do what I want to do. So at the end of 23, I'm like, you know what? I'm done. I'm going to stop. And the crazy thing about it is I went to December of 23. I was in church, and our overseer of the church, Mother Hartsfield, she said, how long you been running? And I'm like, a long time. And she's like, God is calling for you. He has so much in store for you. And I thought about it, but I didn't act right then and there. January of 24 came, and I was still the same person. And I thought to myself, like, you said you was going to do it, but you didn't do it. So then I had to think, like, it's one thing to say something, and then it's another thing to actually do it. So I was going through again January. At the end of January, I'm like, you know what? God, I surrender all. Come February 1st, it came back to me what my mom would tell me when I was a kid. You fast, you pray, you fast, you pray. You want God to do something for you in your life, you're going to fast, you're going to pray. He's going to do everything you need him to do. So that came to me the end of January of 24. February 1st, I said, you know what, God, I surrender. I'm so tired. I felt like in that moment, I went through everything possible. To me, I felt like I went through everything possible that I could go through for God to get my attention, besides him taking my life. So in that moment, I said, you know what, God, you got it. I surrender all. I said, I'm going to do the 21-day Daniel fast. And it's crazy because my church had just done it in January, but I missed a few Sundays in January. So I actually missed the fast. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go on it on my own. Well, me and a few other people, we did it together. But for me, it was so important to me because I said I knew what I experienced last year and what God did for me last year. This year, I'm going to stick to it and I'm going to change and I'm not going back. So February 1st, I went to Wegmans. I bought everything that I needed. I ate fruits, vegetables, water only. I did some peanuts here and there. And I would get up at 4 a.m. and I would pray. And it's so funny because it's funny how God works, right? One day I was at my sister's house and I was talking to them and I was telling them about how it was going for me and how I just felt so new just in those couple of days that I had been doing it. And I was telling them that I get up and I pray at 4 a.m. And one of my sisters from my church, she told me, she said, Sparkle, it's good that you pray, that you get up and you pray at 4 a.m. She said, now when you pray, you wait and God will start speaking to you. So I said, oh, really? So I thought about it. I'm like, okay. So I would still get up and pray at 4 a.m. And I didn't hear anything. And then I believe it was day 19. I said to myself, I stopped praying. And I said to myself, she said, wait. Y'all, I waited. And I don't know how much time went by, but my right ear began to feel like pressure. And I started to get scared because I've never in my 33 years of living experienced this before. So my right ear began to feel pressure. Now, mind you, it's me in a dark room. I'm on my knees. And that's one thing that I learned as well. Like, before I decided to surrender my life to God, I would pray, but I would lay in my bed and pray. I would never get up out the bed and get on my knees and pray. And I've noticed that there was a difference between me laying in the bed and me actually getting on my knees, reverencing God. And it was like, to me, getting on my knees was a surrenderance, like my surrenderance to him. So I would get on my knees and I would pray. My right ear began to feel pressure. Next thing you know, I started to hear, trust me, trust me. Now I'm looking around and I'm like, it's only me. The lights are off. It's a dark room. I didn't get scared, but I would hear, trust me, trust me. And I just felt like the presence of God. And that was the first time in my life that I actually felt the presence of God on my own, in my room, by myself. And tears just began to fall because I've never in my life experienced that. So then the next day, I'm like, you know what? God's speaking to me. I need to get a journal. I need to get a pen, and I need to start writing these things down. So I got my journal. I got my pen. I began to write down different things that God would tell me. And the very first person that God spoke to me about was my sister. And I text her about like 6 a.m. and I'm like, call me when you wake up. She called me like alarm, like, is everything okay? I'm like, yeah, everything is fine. I just began to talk to her and I was like, God began to speak to me about you. And I just began to tell her about the different things that God began to speak to me and say to me and concerning her. And she was like, yeah. And I was like, but you never told me that. So to her, it was like, yeah, girl. But to me, I was like in awe, and I was so shocked because it was like, God, little old me, like you're talking to me. And I've never experienced, like, my little brother, my younger brother, he was 3 years old and he would go around the house, banging on pots and pans, preaching. And we would, like, me and my sisters, we'd be like, shut up. Like, you doing too much. But he continued, like he stayed and he continued. He didn't let nobody tear him down because I just felt like, in that moment, I felt like God called my brother. I never thought that, he would speak to me too. You know what I mean? So I'm like, wow, God, you're actually using me. So as time went on, now that was February, I finished my 21 days. My birthday was February 28th. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going back. I said, once I changed my life, there's no going back. There's no returning to who I was. And my birthday came. I had a birthday dinner and it meant the world to me to not have a drink because the person I used to be, I always felt like to celebrate, I needed to pick up a drink and that would be celebratory for me. So last year I stood my ground and I said, this will not be a year that I will go backwards and I will not pick up a drink. And my 33rd birthday, I felt so much peace, so much joy, so much happiness. And I felt accomplished because I was able to do something that I hadn't been able to do since I turned 21. Every year on my birthday, I picked up a drink, whether it was wine, champagne, liquor, whatever it was. I felt like I needed a drink to celebrate. But last year I said, no, this is not the same person that you was before. And it meant so much to me. And I was grateful that I was able to believe in myself and have the faith and trust God. When he told me to trust him and trust God, that I wouldn't go backwards. So as the months went on, I was like, wow, like, God, you really be speaking to me. I was amazed. The different people that I would reach out to, I would inbox them, I would call them, I would talk to them. And it was still kind of like alarming to me. Like I still kind of was scared. I had a fear. I know what I heard. I know what I hear, but it's like, will people receive what I'm telling them? Like, would they believe like I believe? So last year we went to a women's conference in Florida. My god sister, we went to a women's conference in Florida, and we got up Saturday morning. We went to a service, and then we got up Sunday morning. And she said, Sparkle, I hope God speaks to you today. And I was like, I haven't been able to get up and really pray and really sit in his face to hear him because we were running around getting everything together and ready for the women's conference. She said, Sparkle, get in a quiet place and God will speak to you. So I'm like, okay, you're right. We went to church on Sunday and I'm sitting in service. This alarmed me as well because now remind you, I'm new to this. I never experienced none of these things that are happening. I've never experienced it before. So I was sitting in church and I saw somebody limp in. It was a guy, he limped in. And I reached over to my sister Wendy and I'm like, "Is that your brother?" And she was like, "Yeah." So I'm like, "Okay, I need to talk to him after church." I'm like, "Can you ask Mama, is it okay for me to talk to him?" So she said, "Okay, I'm going to ask her." She came back and she told me that it was okay. So at the end of service, mind you, I'm still in fear and I'm scared. So she's like, "Sparkle, come on, come talk to him." And I'm like, "I'm scared." And her daughter, my niece, she was like, "Don't get scared now. You better go over there and tell him what God told you." So I'm like, whew. I was trembling inside. I went over and I'm trying to talk to him. And he was like, "I can't hear you." He got up, he limped over to the middle pew. He sat down. He said, "Come over and talk to me." So I started talking to him and I was like, I watched you walk in and I saw you limp into church and God spoke to me about you. He only said 2 words. And at the time when I was sitting in the pew, God only said 2 words to me. He said, "Believe me." And I was like, "Okay." He sat down and I'm like, "God told me to tell you to believe him." And then in that moment, God just began to speak through me. And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's not me." And I told him, like, when you believe him, God is going to strengthen the nerves in your leg. So then I'm speaking to him and I'm telling him all these different things. And it was just coming to me. And I'm like, wow, like I've never experienced this before. And then I asked, could we pray for his leg? And he was like, "Yeah." So his aunt pastor came over, Wendy came over. We all prayed for his leg. And at the end, I told him, I said, "Now, if you believe, don't do it because I'm saying that I believe. You only do it if you believe." I said, "I want you to get up and I want you to walk." He was like, "Okay." And he stood up. He stood up straight. Y'all, now mind you, he limped into the church. He got up, he stood up straight, and he walked to the end of the pews. He then stood in place and he then began to jog in place. And in that moment, I fell to the altar. And that day, I feel like that day was when I received my tongues. I began to speak in tongue and it scared me because I'm like, I never did that before. But in that moment, I wasn't expecting that. And that's when I learned, like, there's nothing too hard for God. The impossible is possible through God. And he began to jog in place and he was saying, like, "Wendy, I haven't been able to do this in weeks. Like, the doctor told me that I wouldn't be able to walk. It would take me 2 months to walk." And he went and he got his backpack. He started throwing out his medications that the hospitals prescribed to him on the pew. And I'm just crying. I'm like, "God, all we have to do is believe." Like, when you believe in God and you believe that he can do exceeding and abundantly above all that we can ask, he will do it. And in that moment, I'm like, wow, God, you just blew my mind again. Like, as the months went on, God just began to blow my mind. May came. I was in prayer and I had been praying to God about my job for months. And I asked God, I'm like, "God, can I quit my job? I've always been a hairstylist, but I did it on the side. I never had the faith to do it on my own. I always felt like I needed the 9 to 5 to actually, like, that security. Like, I have this set income coming in every 2 weeks. I never really put my faith and trust in God that he will provide." So in May, I was in prayer and God said, "Tony will gift you with something, receive it." At the time, I didn't know who Tony was, but I wrote it down. June came and God gave me confirmation that I could quit my job. Now I had a suite on Lyle Avenue. I had a suite that I would go and I would do hair in and everything like that. I quit my job on June 18th. 7 days later, the suite where I did hair in, it burned down. And the crazy thing about it is I emailed the job and I told them effective immediately that I was quitting. So I'm like, whew. And I was on the phone with someone and they were like, you should have not quit your job. And I'm like, if I said I have faith in God, I got to really have faith in God. So it's like, now my faith is being tested. Are you going to go backwards? Are you going to go and try to find another job? Are you going to go and try to go back to the job that you came from? Or are you going to continue to trust God and lean on him to provide? So then in that moment, I started looking for buildings. I started looking for different places to rent out to do hair. I came across a building, and long story short, the owner of that building name is Tony. And in that moment, I'm like, wow, God, you blew my mind again. When I found out his name was Tony, at that time, I never knew. I didn't realize like that's what God had told me until I went home the day I saw the building, and I was flipping through my book. Tony will gift you with something. Receive it. And I'm like, wow, God. So this is who Tony is. And the crazy thing about it, a couple months went by and I actually sat down with him and I told him the story. And he said, Sparkle, you want to know what's crazy? This building had your name on it. He said someone had rented out. She paid the security deposit, the first month rent, but she never showed up. He said, I even went looking for her and she just never came. He said, the building had your name on it and this was destined for you. It was meant for you. God had it waiting just for you. And the months went by. We did the renovations and I'm still, leaning and trusting on God and depending on him. It came to the end of the year. Like around, I want to say September, I did a prayer in the park. It was amazing. The people that came out, it blew my mind again because, I don't move until God tell me to move. So everything that I put together, it was God led. God led me to do it. And he spoke to me on everything to do. And by actually that day, from that day forward, it was like I wasn't hearing from him anymore. And I wasn't, not anymore. I won't say anymore. It wasn't how I used to. Like I was hearing from God. It seemed like I was hearing from him every other day. If not every other day, every other day. And then the end of September, it felt like I was hearing from him every so often, here and there. And I was like, wow, God, what am I doing wrong? I felt like I was doing something wrong. I felt like he was mad at me. I felt like it just was like, I felt like I was wrong. I felt like I did something wrong. And until I got on YouTube and I was watching a podcast and I was listening in on when you hear from God, what happens when you hear from God. And the guy who was speaking, he said, a lot of people don't speak about, when God tends to lift and it will seem as if he disappeared from you. He said, when you first surrender your life to God, you're so happy, you're thirsty, you're hungry for God. And then there comes a point where it seems like he's lifted from you or he's disappeared and he's no longer there. And he said, in that moment, when that happens, that's when God is trying to mature you and elevate you in your walk with him. And I just began to cry because I'm like, wow, I felt like I was doing something wrong. But I felt like me watching that podcast episode was God speaking through him to let me know I'm still here. I never left you. I just want to mature you. I want to grow you up. You have things to do. So the crazy thing about it is, right, I listened to that the end of 2024, December of 2024, I listened to that podcast. And when I went and I met with my bishop, he told me, he said, Sparkle, he said, it amazes me how quickly everything is happening for you. He said, a lot of times when people change, it doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen so quick and so fast. He said, but God is trying to catch you up to where you were supposed to be a long time ago. And I was like, wow. So he said, you're going to have dreams. You're going to interpret your dreams. You're going to prophesy. I was like, He was like, you're going to see visions. And the crazy thing about it, after I listened to that podcast, I was praying. I want to say this was like December 30th. I literally had all three in one night. It was like God spoke to me. It was like I had a vision. It was like a throne. And you know how they say, God Jesus sits on the right hand of God. And it was like I saw this vision, and then God said, you passed the test. And in that moment, all I could do was cry, because there was times within those last 3 months of last year where I felt like walking away. I felt like, I couldn't do it anymore, or God left me, or he's not speaking to me as much as he used to, or just hearing different things that people would come to me and they would say like, oh, such and such said, oh, you're on this fake journey. And I'm like, why do people care about the journey that I'm on? Like, this is something that I'm doing for myself. This is something that, I was tired of, and I just wanted to change my life. But the end of December, when I never turned my back. I still got up. I still prayed. I still ministered and spoke with people that sat in my chair. I still was able to, enlighten everybody on my journey and the things that I will go through. And in that moment on December 30th, God told me, you passed the test. And I'm like, wow, God, I've been trying to hear your voice for the last 3 months. And I would hear you some days I didn't. And when he said that you passed the test, I thought about the podcast that I watched when the minister was saying like, God wants to mature you. He wants to elevate you. And in that moment, I said, you know what? I have to have that faith. The faith that I had in the beginning of the year, I have to continue that to overcome all the fears, all the doubts, all the anxiety, anything that tries to creep in to get me to go backwards. I not only owe it to myself, but I owe it to God, because he's brought me so far. He's brought me so far from where I was and who I am today. And that's why I titled this episode, I'm not who I was a year ago, because it blows my mind. When I look in the mirror, I feel like I'm not who I was. Like, the person that I see now is not the person that I saw a year and a half ago. And it just amazes me when people tell me that they see the transformation in me. It amazes me because I see it in myself, and I feel I owe it to myself, because it is like when you see it for yourself. And I've always said, like, when I change, I never want to be that person that preaches to people, oh, you got to change, or X, Y, and Z is going to happen to you, and like preach God into them. I just want to be that person who is pure and genuine and just walks with God. And people ask me like, well, what did you do to get where you are, or what made you change? And I see the growth in you, and I see the elevation in you, and I see what God is doing in your life. What did you do? And that's the person that I want to be. And I pray, and I know that God will answer my prayer, that starting this podcast and having solo episodes, guest features, panel discussions, I pray that God draws many, many, many men, women, children, young adults. Through me, I'm able to draw everyone to God just by listening in, tuning in on every episode. I want you guys to like it, dislike it. I want your honest feedback. I want you to respond. I want to engage with you guys. Hopefully later down the line, I can go live, interact with you all. And I just want to thank you all for tuning in on this very first episode of diving into who I was and who I am and who I'm going to be. And I want you to stay tuned for our next upcoming episodes. And until then, I want you to ask a friend, have you heard Sparkle speak?